Let's go to this conversation now. In a historic development for transparency and accountability in South African politics, President Cyril Ramaphosa has determined that the Political Party Funding Act will come into effect on the 1st of April in 2021. Shaylin Clark from My Vote Counts is here to discuss benefits for democracy. Good evening and thank you so much for your time tonight. Some have hailed this as a step in the right direction. Others have said not. What is your reaction?
Yes, as My Vote Counts, as your viewers may know, we have been advocating for this for years, the transparency of public and private funding of political parties. Before this, we have had no legislation whatsoever of this kind. So this really is a step in the right direction in uncovering all the possible shady dealings, which is all private funding of political parties, as a way to try and mitigate further possible corruption.
And when you look at this, of course, it talks about the fact that, parties may receive funding from foreign entities for training, skills development or policy development, and no member of a political party may receive a donation other than for political party purposes. Some have raised concerns that you're looking at, allocation for funding, skills and all of that, and how this is going to be policed to ensure that it is going for that, towards that purpose and nothing else.
Yes, so that's the biggest thing of this act, that before this, political parties could receive donation from foreign governments, foreign entities, etc. This will mean that they will get no funding from foreign entities whatsoever, only if it is for skills development, as you mentioned. This is one of the loopholes. There are many loopholes, unfortunately, as it goes with new legislation, many loopholes in this act that we as an organization and civil society as a whole have raised. But for us, the most important thing was to get this act implemented so we can actually see how it plays out, so that we can better determine where these loopholes are and also better determine how to best remedy this.
And what would you say are some of your bugbears?
Say it again?
What would you say are some of your bugbears, these loopholes that you're talking about?
Yes, so of course, what you just mentioned about the foreign donation for skills development, of course, then the 100,000 Rand threshold. So what the PPFA means is that political party will now have to disclose their funding of 100,000 Rand and above to their IEC. What we argue is that that is still pretty high. It's very easy to bribe smaller political parties, so even like your ward councillors, local government, smaller amount of money, it's very, very easy to do that. So this is still quite high. This will be one of the things that we would need to look to challenge. There's also the loophole that donors can still donate to parties while being anonymous, which totally defeats the purpose of the act. So that's something that we will need to look at. But again, like I said, this is really a step in the right direction because we had no legislation of this kind whatsoever. So we're moving in the right direction into uncovering private political parties' funding.
And, that the statement that was released by the presidency a little earlier on talks about how, this is part of a commitment of the administration to improving transparency and accountability. And, this has been a huge issue, and not only for political party funding, but even at a time when we are finding ourselves right now with talk of a vaccine and still talk of, non-disclosure agreements that have been signed with a country that still doesn't have as much greater detail of, how these processes and these vaccines were then, were able to be acquired. Certainly, transparency is going to be key here and not just talk as you read the statement.
Of course. I mean, again, before we had no legislation mandating this transparency. Before this, parties could do whatever they wanted, do things behind closed doors. And again, getting this information, this transparency really speaks to our constitutional right of the right to access to information. We need this information to ensure that we mitigate possible corruption, but also especially now going into an election year, we need this information to make an informed vote. So yes, this really does speak to uncovering possible corruption, as I've mentioned. Also, everything we've seen in the state capture inquiry that you've mentioned now, the COVID vaccine, this will definitely now mandate parties to be open and transparent so that we can better see where money comes and goes, and better make a good judgment on relationships between political parties and their donors.
Shailin, thank you so much for your time. Certainly is going to be, something that we are going to be watching closely, particularly as you say that, when we go to the election, you'd really want to know where money is coming from and where money is going, because certainly that's always been the big question. Who is funding and for what reason? And, looking at some of the policies that then get implemented, are those that are funding behind the scenes then responsible for some of what we are seeing? Thank you so much for your time tonight. I do, really appreciate it. That was Shailin Clark from My Vote Counts discussing the new Political Party Funding Act. Up next, Sport News results and updates. Uhle is standing by.